Everybody, regular sound on. Can you hear me? Okay, I can't hear you, so hang on one second. Audio.
Hard time was
Katie,
not
what were
based
you
in
saying at
anything
the end?
objective. It was just based in that they would see you again later.
Yeah, it's entirely subjective. Absolutely.
Talking over people before my sound wasn't working right. So how was everybody?
All good.
No, Dominic, it has not been defeated. That'll be hopefully if I can get the chance to present the full argument. Objective morality will be the last in the series. So objective morality still lives. It just has a new incarnation that I'm going to present on our last conversation about critical thinking skills.
Right.
It'll be a logically
the talk I gave on Saturday.
What's that?
Okay, there was a talk. Yeah, no, I was obviously being a bit silly because there will be always different camps in philosophy, and they will always be like healthily, arguing with each other, but in a hopefully productive way. But great to hear, DLJ, that you had a talk there. I unfortunately missed that one.
Yeah, I know, but honestly, had you been there, you'd never believe in objective morality ever again. It was a winning argument. Everybody was convinced.
You'll have to make that argument when we talk about wisdom, because I'm going to try to make the opposite argument, and I won't be able to have such a broad sweeping claim of victory, I don't think. But I'll be listening with an open mind to your counter argument. Hopefully you'll also be listening with an open mind to my argument for objective morality.
No, not at all, because I already know the answer.
Well, if you already know the answer, then you're not open to any answer that doesn't agree with your confirmation bias. You should go back to our conversation on confirmation bias.
Yes, that's correct. So when I know I'm right, there's no need to listen to any counter arguments.
When you know you're right, you're the least likely to be right.
Well, other than, it's objectively measurable that I'm correct. So
we'll see. You'll make your argument that day, and we'll see what the audience thinks.
DLJ, I didn't know you were like that kind of a person. I thought you were a very open-minded person.
Yes, of course I am. It's just I gave a talk, and it was a 6-hour session, and by the end of it, everybody was agreeing with me, or at least I got very positive feedback anyway. So I'm going, yes, victory, right?
Hi, Garrett. I feel like I haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah, it's been a while, Ginny, but good to have you.
Yeah, it feels nice to come in right at the beginning of the chit-chat time. Yeah, normally I can't do that. So yeah. I haven't seen your daughters in a couple of weeks or so.
Yeah, well, they may pay a visit, so we'll see how they're feeling tonight. They're not at the ice skating rink was flooded, so they're going to be here the whole night. So yeah,
ice skating rink was flooded.
Normally they do ice skating on Tuesday evenings, but the rink was flooded because of the rains here. So yeah.
Oh my! I didn't know you had so much rain.
You're supposed to be flooded, and then they freeze it. Isn't that the point?
Well, unfortunately, it didn't freeze in time, and there was a little too much water. So
there you go.
Tell me again, where are you, Garrett? Are you in New York City?
North Jersey. Yeah.
North Jersey. Okay.
About a 40-minute drive outside New York. Go ahead.
Yeah.
By the way, open mind is both direction. You can accept other people, but you expect other people to listen to you. That's the direction of open mind.
Yeah, no, I have an open mind that he could be right and I could be wrong. I'm totally fine with that, because I like to say when you admit you're wrong with good judgment, you're immediately right again. You're just more right than you were before. And I have no qualms about admitting I'm wrong.
Yeah, because many people think open mind is just accepting other people and don't expect other people to accept you.
No, it's a two-way street. Like if you're not both open-minded, you're not on equal ground, right? Because one of you is being obstinate and the other one has got an open mind, and that's an uneven playing field. So I generally prefer conversations where both people's minds are open. But in this case, I don't mind if DLJ's mind isn't open, because we'll have a large audience of people whose mind will be open, and we can see how they fare between the different possibilities and how I fare. Quite frankly, I'm open to him convincing me I'm wrong. I'm fine with that. That said, we may also have a difference in definition of what objective morality means. Most of the people that I've talked with have a tautologically impossible way or a definition of objective morality, in which case I would agree with him. If you create a definition that's impossible to meet, I will agree with him that it's not a real thing.
No, the main problem, your mind is only one, but the other people mind is many.
Right.
So usually the many defeat the one. So
well,
online,
time also plays a factor in that, right? At one point in time, it was few people that said slavery was immoral, and over time, more and more people started saying slavery was immoral. It used to be, in the ancient world, a matter of fact. Of course, there's slavery, and of course, it's moral. And the winners get to conquer the slaves and get to make them slaves. That was just how it was in all societies globally. But now, over time, the actual moral answer is that slavery is not moral. And we generally agree with that for most of the world, although that's a complicated subject because there are more slaves now than there were even in the ancient world. But that's because the population's so much bigger. That said, let's start the social. And I'm still eating a little bit. I haven't eaten dinner yet, so I'm eating a little snack here to time me through the evening. So I'm going to be off video until the presentation portion. But does anyone want to sort of say where they're dialing in from and what interests them about tonight's topic? No one? There must be someone.
Everybody's gone shy.
Go ahead.
Go, DLJ.
Oh, well, hi, DLJ, currently in the UK, although it should be in Malaysia. Yeah, critical thinking is interesting to me. So it's always good to see how other people present it. Yeah, looking forward to another good session. Last week was wacky. There was stuff going on in the chat. You just think, hang on, are they not listening to the presentation?
They weren't. They, and I wasn't paying attention to the text chat, to be honest, so I didn't see the wacky stuff, but I believe you. There was a guy here last week that has some pretty unusual stuff to say, and I think I did see a little bit of the text chat, and yeah,
Garrett, you're breaking up.
Garrett, yeah. Garrett?
Yeah, you can't hear me?
Yeah, Garrett, your sound, sometimes it's okay, but sometimes you're breaking up.
It may have been that I wasn't facing the computer. Oh no, it says my internet connection is unstable. That's so weird. I have fiber. Let me see my speed test. Anyone else want to introduce themselves while I check out my internet?
Garrett, you're fine now.
Well,
No, it's Michael that's breaking up.
I think it was that I was not facing the computer.
You're okay now.
Okay.
So who else wants to introduce themselves and say where they're coming from and what interests them about the subject?
Hello. Yeah, my name is Rob Lufkin. I am calling from St. Petersburg, Florida. And this is the first time I've tuned in on you guys. And it's just a random encounter and I have no particular interest.
Okay. Well, welcome, Rob. Well, good to have you, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. And this is part of a series that we have on critical thinking. And I'll give an overview of like all of the sessions we've done too, and we have a bunch left. So
Very good.
anyone else want to go next?
I'll go if that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm Sarah. I'm coming in from the Pacific Northwest, and I've been in healthcare as a career. So there's a lot of critical thinking involved in that, but there isn't a lot of spelling it out and saying, I do this and now I'm deducing and now I'm working inductively. It's simply done. At any rate, it's interesting. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, very important to have critical thinking in healthcare. Anyone else want to go?
This is Akshay here, dialing from Ontario, Canada. I just really like the subject of consciousness, philosophy, all that, and I really love to engage in discussions. So I open my spectrum to all discussions of this kind so that I can widen my horizon.
Great. Welcome, Akshay. We actually had a panel on consciousness. It'll probably be up on YouTube in the next month or two. If the topic of consciousness interests you a lot, I think you would enjoy that.
Sure, thanks.
Anyone else want to go?
I'll go.
Yeah, go ahead.
My name's Michael Strasberg. I'm a member of the Free Thinkers Institute, which I find very rewarding. I live in New Jersey. I'll be 69 next month. And I find these meetings very interesting, stimulating. They make me think. And also, being a member of the Free Thinkers Institute, we have Sunday meetings that I find very interesting, where we have made a lot of close bonds with each other. And I think anybody can hone their critical thinking abilities. So I consider this a chance to just improve my ability to think critically.
Great. Thanks, Michael. And in fact, I'll post a little bit of information about a bunch of links about the FTI in the chat, which includes information on membership for anyone interested in learning more about what Michael's talking about. There's a document in there in the links that I just gave that talks about membership information near the bottom. Ginny, go ahead.
Yeah, if everyone in the world could be a critical thinker, would this be a better world, a lovelier world to live in?
I agree. And that's why we're teaching critical thinking skills, is that's the world that I want to create. And I think if we can teach enough people critical thinking skills that we even have a majority of critical thinkers, I think some studies say that there are around 10 to 15% of people that are critical thinkers. I believe that was in the US, not internationally. But to get a majority would be a big improvement.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Jenny. Good to have you.
I'm sorry to jump in, but like 10 to 15% is, I think that's an overestimation.
You know, it was not something that I fact checked. I just read it somewhere. And so admittedly, I didn't fact check it. And normally I do when it's an alarming statistic like that. But I also don't know that there's a good definition, like a good objective definition of what it means to be a critical thinker. I don't think it's been honed in on that well. So I sort of didn't think it was worth fact checking for that reason, although maybe someone has done a critical thinking exam and, you know, they've gotten scientific about it, but I don't know, to be honest. But if anyone wants to fact check that and look up whether or not there's a science of critical thinkers and what the percentage is, I would love to hear data on that. Anyone else want to go?
Joe's got his hand up, Garrett.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Hi, yes. Just speaking to the idea of critical thinking, I think it's important both from a societal perspective to be able to question, wherever you're working and to, improve the environment where you work, but also to think critically about yourself and your life and where it's headed. And I think also critical thinking allows us to ask better questions, which leads us to hopefully better answers, and can lead to an improved life. So anyway, that's my thought.
Great. Thanks, Frank, for introducing yourself. Thanks, Joe, for your comments. And I agree with you completely. I don't think we covered that in the series as far as like all the different places critical thinking can help you in life. But I would argue it's literally all aspects of your life that critical thinking can be useful. And you honed in on a bunch of them. So thanks for that. I also want to mention Frank, who wrote in the chat. I will not be able to follow the chat very much during tonight's session because I'll be focused on what people are saying. But right now there's not a lot of chat going on, so I'll be able to follow. Jeff, my background is a library, but it's not where I am. It's Cornell's oldest library. My alma mater put out these backgrounds, and I love that library, so that's where my background is coming from, although it'll be back when I present. I'm just snacking right now. Frank said he's having technical difficulties, so can't speak, but he's just joining the FTI and calls himself a citizen philosopher and starting to look into the organization. 84 retired CS professor. My major was CS, Frank, so we share that background, and he's from Oceanside, California. So Oded, go ahead. And Ginny and Joe, you have your hands up. I'll put them down.
Yeah.
No, I have one more.
Oh, do you have something else to say, Jenny?
Yeah, if I may. I'm being a Don Quixote, so to speak, but if every human being were to be raised and encouraged to be a critical thinker from the moment they're a child and up, I don't think world would accept dictators such as the ones in North Korea and various countries throughout the world. So that's just being a Don Quixote, being a dreamer here.
I listened to Don Quixote and it inspires me, Jenny. So I'm with you on, being a little bit on the idealist side, although I have an essay on why I'm a realistic idealist and why you should be one too, which I can share if anyone wants. But let's let Oded put his hand down. Oded, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I introduce myself. My name is Oded Learner. Learner is the person that like to learn. Oded is person with positive attitude. So this is my name, and I try to live to my name. This is my introduction. I live in Silicon Valley, California. Now, the idea is critical thinking, but as I learned from my instructor in the past, in the present, that there are 3 stages. One is the thinking. Second one is the speaking. Put your thought to other people. Then you commit kind of in a way. And the last and most important is doing what you speak about, the action. So you're thinking, talking, and action. And you cannot stop when you think. You have to say what you about. And when you say something, you have to commit to what you are saying by action. So this is my view about critical thinking. It's critical that you have to finish the process from thinking to action. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Oded. I agree with you. I think, having the action to back up the critical thinking is important because, a friend of mine only introduced me to what this quote actually meant, which is the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I used to think it meant that it's bad to have good intentions. And I hated the quote because I think it's good to have good intentions. But he's like, no, Garrett, that's not what it means. It's that you can't just have good intentions without good actions. And even if you have the best critical thinking in the world, if you take no actions based on those critical thinking skills, you're not positively influencing the world in any way. And that's part of why a friend convinced me to start the FTI because, you know, I had a lot of thoughts that I thought would add value to people, and I wanted to share them. And I wanted to create a format where other people could do the same thing and share their thoughts that add value to other people.
Yeah, some people do the opposite. They start with action and then they start to think about it. And this is not the way it should done. That means the process is only in one direction. You can do something and then think what you should have done. So this creates damage and regret.
Agreed. Yeah, better to think first and act with thoughtful, you know, a thoughtful nature to you.
Yeah, but in between you have to speak so other people know and criticize you. And this is called critic thinking, that you let other people criticize you, and this create a good action. Because if you just think and you do without consulting with other people, you may create a damage.
Agreed.
No one is perfect.
Yeah, and in fact, that's why the second intention of the FTI is to transparently share your beliefs with other people. So you speak your thoughts, and then you listen with an open mind to where they may have reasons you may be wrong. You know, DLJ and I were joking back and forth about both of us being right earlier, but I think we both have an open mind that we might be wrong. And I hope he does. I know I do. So, and so, yeah, like having an open mind to possibly being wrong about something that we believe is I think a hallmark of intellectualism. So, and the scientific method. So that said, Dominic has his hand up. Go ahead, Dominic.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Just doing a bit of introduction. I'm Dominic, based in Denmark, originally from Germany. Been living in Ireland for 10 years. And yeah, really thanks for setting all this up, and I'm enjoying intellectual conversation, I guess, and a little of brain jogging. Yeah, quick ideas, because I know we are not in the actual debating right now, but would be then in terms of how to draw conclusions. What comes to mind is inductive and deductive approaches, and I also think that any conversation or any philosophy or concepts around critical thinking must also address the realm of human emotions and intuitions. Maybe we'll touch on that as well. So I think it belongs into any conversation that about critical thinking as well. So that's my point of view. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. Well, I agree with you. We're not going to touch on the purpose of emotions tonight, because we're going to have a separate, I think we might have had a separate event on that, but if we haven't, we will end up having one, because I have an essay on that subject. So we will get to it eventually if we haven't done it yet. So that said, I'm going to go ahead and get started with the presentation portion. So I'm going to go off of back onto video, and I'm going to have to eat a little more later after the presentation, and so I'm going to go off video again later. But let me oh shoot, I forgot to okay. So first I want to do an introduction. So my name is Garrett Lang. I'm a software inventor turned software developer turned software inventor, now an entrepreneur. My hobby is writing and discussing practical philosophy. I'm also the executive director of the Free Thinker Institute, which is the organization that brings you tonight's event. We're a not-for-profit looking to support and empower members. We really want to help people be the best versions of themselves, to seek truth and to be fair, which is the first of what we call the 5 intentions. And we want to do that through transformational personal and professional development. And so we have focuses on both aspects of development. We have free events like this one every Tuesday evening, covering a wide range of topics typically not covered in academia or industry. Sadly, critical thinking is not typically covered explicitly in academia or industry. We also have weekly members only events that Michael alluded to, which are also free right now, to apply practical wisdom into our daily lives. We have only one rule in the FTI, and I'll ask everybody to abide by that one, or you will be moderated, and that is to remain polite. You're allowed to say anything you want, even if it's unsavory, but it has to remain polite. And we just do that to keep ourselves in the critical thinking part of the brain, the logical part of the brain, the cerebrum. Speaking of emotions, when we get emotional, we often say things we regret and make bad decisions. And so we don't want people to get emotional here. We want to keep calm, cool, and collected, even if we have strong opinions. And instead of saying to someone why you disagree with them, if you disagree with them, I highly recommend asking them why they think what they think. You'll learn a lot more by empathizing with someone and understanding where they're coming from than you will by telling them that they're wrong. We don't really learn from telling other people that they're wrong, although that is most people's natural inclination and what you probably see happening in most conversations throughout life. We try to do it a little differently here at the FTI, and I call that listening to understand, where we listen to people with different opinions than us rather than trying to tell them why they're wrong. So that said, tonight's lecture discussion is about critical thinking, and you can see my screen with the presentation. Let me get all my screens. What's that? Presenter view. Here we go. All right. So today we're going to be talking about types of inference. I'm going to talk about how this fits into our series on critical thinking. The first week we talked about research and information literacy, which is basically going out and crawling and gathering data. Then we talked in week 2 about evidence evaluation. I should put the numbers on here. And then although they're not exactly numbered, it's more about this is what I call the tower of critical thinking. The not exactly a tower, but you'll see what I mean when I describe it. Evidence evaluation is honing in on the data that you gathered that actually holds water, meaning that it is valid and, you know, from an objective source or from a source that is credible on that field in that area. And so that's why this is a shorter rectangle than information literacy, because this is a broader set of data, and then you narrow down to the data that's relevant. From that relevant data that you gather that seems valid, you can use formal logic to crawl your way up to the knowledge of objective reality, which you then use to create, you know, wise decisions. And I would argue wise decisions are those that first prevent significant unnecessary harm, and that second increase happiness and decrease harm. And I'll go into that in more detail on the last week of the conversation. And then the other way, other than formal logic, that you can come to conclusions is by types of inference, which we're going to talk about today. There are a bunch of different types of inference, some of which are more reliable than others. The ones that are unreliable, when they're unreliable, you fall off this little cliff to the misinformation, and so you don't climb up that knowledge of objective reality and the wisdom. And then biases can, if we're aware of them, be part of, you know, climbing this this ladder of knowledge and wisdom. But then biases can also lead us in the wrong direction, where they lead us to false conclusions. And so that's where you know, biases and types of inference both have the ability to fall off the cliff here. Fallacies are like basically things that seem logical, like they try to pretend to be formal logic, but it's actually false logic. And so they create false conclusions. Generally speaking, like there's probably a possibility of a fallacy actually coming to a right conclusion, but it's under the wrong reasons if that were the case. And so fallacies generally come to, you know, pretty false conclusions most of the time, the overwhelming large majority of the time. And so this is kind of and then basically all of that is in the service of learning about objective reality and then making better decisions. And so that's really what I call the tower of critical thinking, and sort of the series that we are doing here is going to go through end of August, and we'll cover each one of these rectangles in more detail. So agenda-wise, we're going to talk about what a type of inference is. I kind of talked about it a little bit. And then we're going to talk about 6 different types of inference. And then I'm going to sort of summarize, and we may try to do a workshop. It'll be like I'll probably take a vote on whether or not we want to go right into conversation or whether we want to do a workshop. We haven't really done a workshop in a while, but I'm open to either one. I can describe what the workshop is, and then people can say whether or not they'd rather have a conversation in the broader group or break out into breakout rooms and do a workshop, although we would need moderators for each of the breakout rooms. So that said, let me also pull up my list of participants. So let me go to the next slide. So what are rules of inference? It's basically going from a set of data, a set of assumptions, and drawing some kind of conclusion about the situation that you're looking at. And so you might have a hypothesis and you're testing that hypothesis, and you want to come to a conclusion about whether or not the data basically supports the hypothesis. And it's, part of the process of learning. We all kind of do this naturally, and we all use these sets of rules of inference naturally. As I forget, I think it was Sarah from the healthcare background said, we all do this kind of without thinking about it. But it's nice to have a knowledge of the different types of inference, so that you know where their strengths and weaknesses are, and we're going to talk about those tonight. So that you know which ones to use when, and how much to rely on them, and how much skepticism to have, depending on the type of inference that is used by you or another person. So if we use the wrong type of inference, like I said, you can fall off that tower of critical thinking and come to a wrong conclusion because the type of inference you used was not a solid ground to stand on. So that said, we're going to first talk about statistical inference. You basically use this when you want to make predictions or estimates about a larger population based on a sample. It's, I'll basically say that the idea is that you're using a sample size where you're taking a statistically significant sample size, and you're using techniques like hypothesis testing to basically take a hypothesis and say whether or not that hypothesis is largely likely to be true based on the sample that you pulled. Now, the good part is that it's quantifiable, it's testable. You can handle large amounts of data using statistical, statistical tools, and it can handle really complex relationships. There are some downsides, and that is that it requires some assumptions about the data and the underlying population. And if you make the wrong assumptions when you're data gathering, you can come to the wrong conclusions. If you don't gather data in a methodical way, then you can come to the wrong conclusions. And so if any of those assumptions that you're making are incorrect, basically you can get the wrong answer. If you wanted to, just an example, I like to give specific tangible examples. If a company wanted to analyze customer data and predict the future buying behaviors of that customer, they could use statistical inference to do that kind of predictive analysis. And we're going to hold questions till the end of the presentation. People generally like that, so they could kind of get the idea of the presentation and in a logical form, but just take notes if you have questions, and then we can come back to any slides that people have questions about. So the next one is causal inference. So this is when you want to understand the cause and effect relationship between variables definitively using data. And so this is like a high high degree of certainty where you're drawing a conclusion about, if I, light a fire underwater, it's going to, for long enough, it's going to make that water boil. And, it's often used in scientific research and experimental studies. It provides really strong evidence for cause and effect relationships. I like to say I don't believe anything with 100% certainty, and I don't recommend anyone does. We should always have some level of skepticism for just about anything, but we do have to decide what is worth questioning and what's not. If someone creates a peer-reviewed study or a series of peer-reviewed studies that create a strong degree of certainty with a cause-effect relationship, and skeptics have been proven wrong that they were, skeptics and that they were convinced from running their own experiments, then I would say it's no longer worth questioning whether or not that's cause and effect. It's cause and effect, at least enough that it's no longer worth questioning it. And so some philosophers will disagree with that. Hume was one that would probably disagree with that. But we can get into that and the conversation portion of the evening if people want to. I forget I'm blanking on his hypothesis that sort of goes against that the laws of physics would remain constant throughout time, and that you can't really create any sort of causal inferences. But this type of inference does, with a high degree of certainty, show causal relationships. Now, the downside is that it can be really difficult. It takes a lot of effort to prove causality. If you've heard the saying that's causation, or is it causation or correlation? I forget the exact saying, but it's basically putting doubt on whether or not it's just correlation, where two things are correlated but one doesn't really cause the other. This really tries to show that there is truly a cause and effect relationship, and that it's not just correlation. But that requires a lot of data, gathering that data in a very conscientious way and in a very careful way. So a medical researcher might use causal inference to determine whether a new drug is effective at treating a disease. Because of the amount of healthy skepticism, I probably shouldn't have given that example, because of the amount of healthy skepticism about the medical industry and drug research, which is probably actually founded in good reasoned skepticism. Maybe that's not the best example, but you get the idea. Is like, if someone wants to say that if you do this, then you do that, then this is the outcome, then which, when testing new drugs, that's supposed to be the idea, although there are a bunch of ways of people gaming the system there. But that is supposed to be how it works. And so, yeah, let's go to inductive inference. This is when you want to explore something new and generate new, like a new phenomenon, and generate new hypotheses or theories. So basically what you're doing is you're creating specific observations, and then you're creating a broad generalization from those specific pieces of data that you've gathered. And so you're creating a general rule from these particular observations you've made. Now, this is great in that you can create these new hypotheses or theories that fit the data that you've gathered, and it's useful for coming up with like a brainstorming of new ideas, but you have no high degree of certainty that your conclusions are correct. Even if all your observations are accurate, you may have only observed the pieces of the puzzle that fit the hypothesis you said, but the pieces that you didn't observe absolutely did not fit it. And the example is like, if inductive inference was always right, then the Titanic never would have sunk, because they only saw the part of the iceberg above the water, and it didn't look that big, so they weren't too worried. Well, when they ran into it, they realized, oh, that was a really big iceberg. And, it turns out the Titanic sank because of all the data that they didn't see, which was everything under the water. So that's the problem with inductive inference. It is useful, and you can learn new things from it, and it's a good way of brainstorming new hypotheses that might be worth testing with more scrutiny later, but it's not really something that you should have a high degree of reliance on. So, for example, if a biologist is observing animals in the wild and they make a set of observations, they may come up with an inductive set of inference to describe why that animal is doing a certain behavior. However, that biologist only sees that animal during certain times of day. And, they only see them during the times that they can observe them. For example, if you're dealing with an animal that burrows and you don't have cameras in the places that it burrows, then you're not seeing it during that part of its behavior. And that may totally refute your actual hypothesis as a biologist of the observations you made when it was above ground. So that's an example of where inductive inference could be unsound, even though it's sound with all the observations that you made. To give a more specific example of the possible failure of inductive inference rather than my Titanic example. So deductive inference is useful when you're very certain of your assumptions and you want nearly 100% accurate conclusions. It's common in math and logic. Basically, you know, it's when you reach a conclusion by logical generalization of a known fact, and it starts from a general principle and predicts specific results. Conclusions are logically certain, provided the premises are true. And if the initial premises are incorrect, though, your conclusions are, you know, very much suspect. And so you need to know that your initial assumptions are correct. It all starts with valid original assumptions, and it's limited by the information contained in the premises. You can't prove things true about things that you know nothing about. Now, a mathematician may use deductive inference to prove a theorem based on established mathematical principles. An interesting factoid is that mathematics itself is not supposedly, this isn't just supposedly, like mathematicians, like theoretical mathematicians would agree that mathematics itself is not on totally solid ground in proving its own existence. The actual basis of mathematics requires some, you know, assumptions that theoretical mathematicians would consider unsafe, but I personally would consider them much safer because, you know, I'm not quite as skeptical as theoretical mathematicians. But that said, the time that you would use this is when you know your premises are certain and you have a high degree of certainty or an extremely high degree of certainty on your premises, and you want a really solid conclusion. So this really parallels formal logic. And then abductive inference is when you want to generate the best possible explanation for a set of observations that you have about a limited set of information. So, you know, if you don't have a lot of observations, you can't get more. And the example they give is like detective work, right? If there's a crime scene, you can't go back and reproduce that crime scene, right? The person is dead, like...
Garrett, you're breaking away.
Oh, I'm breaking up? Can you hear me now?
Garrett, you're breaking up again.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yeah, now again. Yeah, it broke up for a while, for a bit.
Sorry about that. I don't know what's wrong with my
Okay,
internet.
now.
500 megabits per second when I did the speed test. So, and 480 megabits per second upload. So I'm not
it
sure.
seems he's gone now.
Can you not hear me? Hello? Can you hear me? Hello?
Nope.
Katie, you can hear me?
No, we can't hear you again.
You can't hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, so Katie can
A
hear
little
me.
bit
Some people
choppy.
can't hear me. So I'm going to keep going.
No, you're okay. Yeah, it's going in and out. Yeah, it's in and out. Yeah.
Okay. So I think Katie can hear me okay. So
Shutting your video off will restore your sound.
I don't think it's my internet. I could be wrong.
Garrett, did you catch that from Sarah?
What's that?
To save your bandwidth, turn your video off.
The problem is everybody else's, it's not a bandwidth thing because I have 500 megabits per second upload and download. So I don't think it's a bandwidth thing.
Garrett, sometimes it's the audio settings.
What's that?
Probably have too many windows open on your machine. You're running out of cycles for Zoom.
I don't think that's it either because I have a ridiculously fast computer, one of the fastest Macs on the market. But you guys can't hear me consistently? Is that? Oh no, now it's got really slow bandwidth. That's interesting. Now it's going faster again. But when I first started it up, it was slow. So it seems like there's an unstable internet connection tonight. I'll complain to my internet service provider and I may end up switching.
You're okay right now.
Yeah, Garrett,
keep going for 5 minutes. If it persists, then we like one would check. Keep going for like 5 minutes. It will maybe just pick up. We might lose like 1 or 2 minutes of information, but I think it seems to be fine. Thank you. And
all right, thanks. So abductive reasoning is useful for generating hypotheses and explanations. It's good at uncertainty and incomplete information. However, it's really also very good at coming up with bad conclusions because the data is so limited. There can be multiple competing hypotheses that explain the same evidence, and there's really no clear way to tell which one is right just from abductive inference. It's really, you got to make your best guess. Unfortunately, that is the best that we can do in certain situations, like we can, a situation of detective work or police work where you're reviewing a crime scene. There's only so much data about the original situation that is known, and there's only so many data points that you can pick up. So that's abductive inference. Bayesian inference is a statistical form of inference where basically if you have a current model for predicting the future, this allows you to update that model, pulling in new data. And so it basically lets you update the model to create new, more accurate predictions based on the new information that comes in. And so this is used in machine learning, data science, and statistical modeling. And basically, you're basically taking the prior knowledge that you have about the situation at hand, whatever you have a model for. You're taking the new data that comes in. The old model was created using old data, and we used to do this with I used to help with a product that basically did a budget allocation for marketing. And so how much money do you spend on TV versus email? Well, our model would predict how much you should spend in each area, but as new data would come in and we would see the new effectiveness of ads, things may change, right? The situation during coronavirus, like everything changed. So we needed to pull new data in, and I wasn't with that company anymore then, but that's an example where there's a major shift in behavior. And so the new data needs to come in to update the model. And so in general, that's what Bayesian inference is. It's updating a statistical model with new data to incorporate that new data into the model and create more accurate predictions going forward. And the problem is it requires a prior probabilistic model, which can be difficult to come up with if you don't have a data scientist around or a statistical modeler around. And it is computationally intensive for large data sets and complicated models. But you might, you might use something like this in like program trading, for example, where you're trading stocks, or the example that I gave in MarTech is a good example as well. Now, let me tell you two things we could do. We could go into conversation. I also created, and I'll share the deck from today. That's the last type of inference we're going to cover. These are the most commonly used ones. I don't think it's totally comprehensive, but it is fairly okay. So some people told me that they could hear everything. So I have a feeling the people who were complaining about my internet might actually have problems on their side. So I'm just going to keep going, having read that. So thank you for the person that wrote me to say that. I'm going to put the slides in here. And we could do two things. We could go into breakout rooms and we can have each person give an example of like, how you would use each of the different types, 5 most common types of inference, which are these in the slide deck. And then, or we could just have a conversation about types of inference, and we can broaden it to include what's it called, other aspects of coming to conclusions using types of inference. So does anyone want to write in the chat whether or not they prefer to do breakout sessions or stay as a group and talk? Just write breakout or group.
I'm sorry, Garrett,
In the
for
chat.
breakout room for how long? Half an hour or how?
I would probably say like 15 minutes of a
Oh,
breakout
15
session.
minutes. Oh, okay. Thank you.
So I had 2 groups, 3 groups. Most people, when we vote on this, do choose groups, so I don't mean to bias people, but so we got 1 in breakout. I always used to like breakout sessions because it gives people more of a chance to talk. But I want to do what the group wants to do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 to 2. So I'm gonna stay in the group. So why don't we just raise hands? Any questions people have or comments people want to make? I would also love to know whether or not you learned something. I like to know that, whether or not this is useful to people. And so if people can write in the chat if you did learn something, you know, I would love to see if people learned and if it was useful. And so we had some really good comments earlier about other areas that critical thinking applies. And so I wonder if people could continue to sort of augment. And, you know, I don't claim to have all the answers. I try to put together a useful presentation, but I don't have all the answers. So would love to hear, you know, if people have other things that they want to add to what I presented that can kind of complement it, or if they have questions about anything I presented, I'm happy to answer those too. Dominic, go ahead.
Yeah, no, first of all, well done. And I always enjoy your little lectures and the introductions. And to me, there's always something to learn. And I really like how you put things together and present them. So big thank you for that one.
Thank you.
Yeah. In general, yeah, I think especially when it comes to really, working from existing data and how to, you know, sort of make it meaningful, and what conclusions to draw. I think to me, whichever, you know, approach one might take, the human factor will always ruin it, maybe one or the other way, or improve it. But you know what I mean. It's so I guess everything you covered is very much what exists on paper and this methodology that's out there. It's probably goes back to what a lot of scholars in the history of philosophy also have provided, and I think that makes perfect sense. But I guess things get shaky as soon as the human factor came in, and you couldn't possibly cover that. You just showed us what's out there, and that makes perfect sense. But I think, yeah, what maybe is then interesting to look at what's happening there, where we have all this knowledge and we have all the theory on paper, and whenever the human factor comes in, as in actually applying this methodology, that's where things go awry, you know. These are just my very first early thoughts. But again, thanks for your presentation.
Yeah, no problem, Dominic. And normally I do try to cover stuff that's not typically covered, but in critical thinking, I didn't want to try to recreate like the perspective on critical thinking. I wanted to teach a lot of what was out there so that I was, you know, standing on the shoulders of giants. But I also will add, you know, and have added in some of the prior weeks, like my own material about like what makes a source trustworthy or not trustworthy. For example, that was original material of my own, which we covered last week. And so if there are situations, Dominic, that you can think of, which you would go, well, this is all great in theory, but here's a scenario, Garrett, like here's a specific scenario where this could fall awry, then, you know, raise your hand and ask that question, and then let's walk through it as a group. And what I'll probably do is walk through, you know, how the 5 intentions can be used along with critical thinking, which is one of the 5 intentions, the 3rd intention, in fact, to sort of like adequately handle, you know, that particular scenario given human nature as well. Because I do think that if someone comes and listens to all of our lectures on critical thinking, they'll get more than what's just covered in academia. what's out there. I think today was more typically by the book stuff, and so it was less innovative. I typically focus on innovative stuff, but today was more standard stuff. So it's a good observation. That said, Dominic, if you want to raise your hand again, if you have a specific scenario that we could walk through, I'd love to do that. And let's let Joe go next.
So great presentation. I lost sound for a little bit, so I don't know. Maybe this might have already been covered, but when I think about these rules of inference, these ways of finding out facts or deriving facts from the world, I think one of the most important things is to actually have a framework and a set of principles, so then you can actually start to create rules of inference. So the idea of, I'm kind of thinking about it in terms of like how I derive even a financial model. And a very simple model would be, you have a set of principles, and then you could ask, you put together a set of logical rules that enable you to have a financial system. So if something like assets, then what is an asset? And then you have assets that are in service. Then you understand that there are assets that are not in service. And then what does that mean? And then so you start to say, then how do you manage your assets? So it's based off of having a set of principles that would be based on one category could be assets, another category could be operations, another category could be revenue streams. But the bottom line is you have a framework for which you then can start to infer, and then you can start to deduce and apply these rules. And this applies in philosophy as well, in philosophical thought as well. It's one of the beauties of Stoicism, where you have the cardinal virtues. It allows you to sit there and ask a set of questions and infer about what is right action. And the right action is what is virtuous. So you have somewhat of an answer, but you still have to kind of create the model. And you can do it based off of deductive reasoning and all of these things. And what you start to see is the role of theory and how theory actually starts to, why it's important to have theory for cause and effect. And it's kind of even there's the idea of models and ontologies that could also be entered into the discussion as well. Anyway, those are just some initial thoughts. I had not seen, I missed part of the presentation, so you might have covered some of that. But I draw frameworks sometimes as a way of thinking, and that's one way that's helpful for me.
Great. Yeah, I mean, great points. I actually use all these critical thinking, tools to create my own metaphysical system, which I'm still, is kind of a work in progress. And when we do these events, they're all sort of pieces of my metaphysical system that kind of hold together the different presentations. And so what you're saying is exactly what I'm trying to do in my life, and I think is good for all of us to try to do in our lives, is to use these sort of ways of coming to conclusions to come to a valid set of conclusions that we feel we can live our life with integrity on. And that's really what the 5 intentions are intended to do. They're very similar to the 5 Stoic virtues. I think it's 4 Stoic virtues. Shoot, now I'm blanking. So courage, practical wisdom. Well, I have a diagram that we're going to go over on Stoicism, where I basically like riff on the Stoic virtues and apply a little bit of FTI philosophy to them, which, if you like Stoicism, I think you'll like that one. So thank you for your comments, and I agree with you completely. I think that's a good piece of like food for thought for everyone here to think about how to practically apply what we talked about today into your daily lives, which is what we do as members of the FTI, is like, how do we use these rules of inference to sort of come to a solid set of conclusions, but also know when to have skepticism. Cassie.
Hey there, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Also, I should note that my name isn't actually Cassie. That's my name, and it just kind of dawned on me that it's interesting to know that might have made an inference regarding my identity based on the name Cassie given to you on the title. I don't know. I think that there might be something kind of a bit interesting, kind of funny or amusing about that. I loved your presentation, but I think specifically I loved your explanation or description of Bayesian inference. I've heard of Bayesian inferences or the notion. I'm not quite sure. I know there it goes by a specific thinker. I can't quite remember their name. I know that that might be part of it, but I never really understood the concept. So I think the way that you laid it out really helped clarify some of the confusions I had about it. I guess there was just two things I wanted to mention, so I'll be very brief. I did want to mention that one of the things that you were talking about earlier, if I'm not mistaken, the problem that you had provided was the one by Hume, and I think the one that he presents is referred to as the problem of induction.
Yes.
And essentially, if I understood it correctly, what it is that you take the collective observations that an individual has made with respect to any phenomena in the world. So, for example, imagine billiard balls. A white ball hits another ball. Bless you. A white ball would strike another ball. Bless you again. And it would cause that secondary ball to move. And we think that the white ball had caused the other ball to move. And if I'm not mistaken, I think what David Hume would say that all that we've really seen is one thing occur and then a secondary event. We make an association between the two, and we say that the other. So one came for the other, and therefore that one that came for was the cause of the secondary thing occurring. But you can't actually draw that conclusion, since there are times when we make these types of associations and find that they don't hold out. Like, for example, you might see swans, and every single swan that you see is white until you go to Australia, for example, and happen to see a black swan. And so you would have inferred previously that all swans must be white until you stumble upon a black swan. It's not to say that the reason wasn't good, but it's just to say that it doesn't guarantee the conclusion. So I think that what he's saying is that one can never actually provide a cause and effect explanation for something, because at the end of the day, we can't be sure. What's kind of some of the famous saying, like, even though the sun has risen every single day for the last hundreds of thousands of years or whatever, we can't be sure that tomorrow the sun will rise again. And so that's one of the things I wanted to mention. And the last thing, I'll also try and make this brief, is just to say that I was thinking about what Joe was mentioning just a second ago, and it kind of got me thinking. That is true. I guess maybe we might use something like a framework, like a model, as it were, to draw inferences about the world, whatever that model happens to be, and the thing towards which it is created. So I think that there was a financial that was being used as an example, and I guess it kind of got me thinking, like, what is the nature or function or role of inference? Like, what is it that inferences do for us? I think most people think that it helps us draw conclusions or draw explanations of something. I think that requires further explanation. And also, I kind of got to thinking, like, it's interesting because if we make say, example, scientific observations of the world, we look at a plant and we might ask, what are the conditions under which it grows or it thrives, and what would cause it to, say, be destroyed. You can infer certain conclusions out of that, or maybe those are laws that govern that ecosystem. And then what about, like, ethical considerations? Like, if I'm deciding maybe whether to go into one given charity over another, or if I should spend my free time at a soup kitchen, right? Maybe what kind of inferences can I draw regarding maybe the specific moral or ethical framework under which I subject myself to, or through which I live my life, and maybe that the specific inferences that emerge from that kind of helps either provide more principles or a kind of direct, as it were, command or action that I can abide by. Maybe, I hope that was clear. I might have kind of thrown out a lot of verbiage there.
I
all I really want to
go ahead. just try to finish up. We want to keep to under 2 or 3 minutes.
No, thank you very much.
Okay,
thank you very much. That was basically
I
it.
forgot to give that.
Basically, just wanted to mention the human thing.
Go ahead, quick.
No, thank you very much.
What was your name, by the way?
Daniel.
What is it?
Daniel.
Daniel. Okay. Sorry, your internet's breaking up. So thanks, Daniel, for reminding me of the problem induction. You know, I wanted to remind everyone each time that you have your hand up, if you could stick to asking one question or making one comment and try to keep it to under 2 or 3 minutes, just so that we can get around to everybody. And then if you have a second question or comment, just lower your hand and raise it again, and we'll come back to you. I also, did manage to see something in the chat that, well, first, let me respond to your point about the problem of induction. I do think that was what Hume was saying, but I would argue that Hume existed at a time before cause and effect conclusions, basically causal inference, was statistically understood and certain. I could be wrong about that, but I'll fact check myself with ChatGPT. But my guess is that Hume existed before causal inference was like scientifically defendable. And I would argue that at this point, when you have causal inference in the case that I mentioned by peer-reviewed studies that even skeptics have been convinced of, there's no question of whether or not there's a problem of induction anymore. As long as the laws of physics themselves aren't changing, there is no problem of induction as far as I'm concerned. But that's kind of a conversation for another day and a bit of a digression from today's topic of critical thinking. So I don't want to delve too deeply there, but that's kind of my take. That said, thank you for your comments, and I'm going to let Dominic go next.
Oh, it's already me. Yeah, very interesting comments there. I'm always listening and learning. Yeah, in terms of just quickly on induction, deduction, I think induction basically has the mission to to generate new information, whereas deduction is basically you have pre-existing information and you just basically sort of rediscovering existing relationships between existing information by just logically connecting. So you're not generating actually new information. So that's my understanding of it. So they actually they have different purposes. So, okay. And then in terms of examples, in terms of human factor, what we talked about earlier, I mean, a classic one to me is feedback forms and how people fill them out, And then on the other end, what comes up after all these feedback forms have been filled out, maybe by thousands of people, is that on the other end, whoever was sending out those forms wants to make data-driven decision. Yeah. So the big buzzword is data-driven decision making. And then they sit down, and they have their data, and they believe in their data, and then work from that. And but then you go back and you think the motivation for how and in what way people fill out their feedback forms is very varied. Some people just want to skim through it. They just click the main tick boxes at the top, and that's to me that is where the human factor is. There's a hidden bias because some options are at the top and not at the bottom. Or, after the 10th question, a lot of people are worn out and just start skipping through, or they just don't tell the truth because they don't want to reveal certain information, and so on and so on. So that to me is one example. Another example is in the realm of the sciences and scientific papers. There's a lot, and I think in the science community, or how should I say, a lot of going on about when you publish a paper, your reputation is based a lot on how much quotations you get and your paper is quoted. And so a lot where you might think, oh, look, this paper has been quoted a lot or has been published because that scientist had something to say is really what motivates that is to improve one's reputation, to get more quotation, and so on. So there's a silent battle going on underneath about scientific papers and how often you get quoted, and that, you know, and all this is just invisible. On the other end, where then sits any entity that wants to make the great data-driven decisions, you know, and these to me are two examples for the human factor, and where we have all the theory on paper, but it very quickly just falls apart when it comes to applying it in practice. Yeah.
Thank you, Dominic, and I apologize. I was reading some of the chat there, so I I did not get that clear enough that I can respond to it well. Sorry for that, Dominic. Mike, I'm going to let you go next.
I like what you've done and how you put together the process. It's a very complex process, and you presented a lot of it in a way that's very understandable. I'm going to borrow some of those examples for some of my work in the future.
Great.
The Bayesian thing and the method, and several people have alluded to that. You need a framework because the world is not based on linear models and well-behaved statistics. There's an occasional iceberg floating, and that occasional iceberg is 9/10 hidden and is buried into unknown unknowns. There's a discipline for which works somewhat, as you mentioned. You were doing some work in COVID at one stage of your career. The things that bite you are the unknown unknowns that you couldn't have assumed. Now, there is a lot written on design of experiments, because you can't get all the data in the entire universe. And so design of experiments of abstracting your data model and your model gives you a shot at not complete success, but a shot at getting into the nonlinear multidimensional aspects of this stuff. There's several papers and treatises on this design of experiments, and Mathematica, and even SPSS has some material on that stuff. I'm curious also as to, did you have a particular source of a book that you used to abstract the data that you presented to us today?
I did a lot of research, and actually my biggest source was ChatGPT, to be honest. So unfortunately, ChatGPT is not good about giving its sources, but I did most of the research on ChatGPT and a little bit of Google.
Well, design of experiments is another word to add to the vocabulary as to where to look for it, that helps you find the icebergs. They call it somewhat the global minimization problem versus the local minimization problem, and you get a perfect answer for the local minimization problem, but you get higher and higher in climbing a mountain that may not be the most important mountain in your data. You refine that to 30 significant figures, and you miss the 2 significant figures of the iceberg. You picked a difficult subject to bring us into, and I appreciate it. you.
No, I tend to be a glutton for punishment about difficult subjects, right? I tried to give an argument on free will, which has been, argued since the dawn of humanity. So, I don't shy away from difficult subjects. And I've also covered gun control and abortion and a lot of like what would typically be considered like things that a not-for-profit should stay away from. But I really want to share opinions about even things that are historically divisive or difficult to tackle, but just share each other's opinions. And Lauren mentioned in the chat that she found the lecture helpful to realize the types of errors that one of the authors she's reading was making, to hone in on the types of errors that he or she was making. And, I think I really appreciate that Lauren, and I hope that everyone else will do the same thing, is reading an author with a critical eye, because just because someone wrote a book doesn't mean they're right. I read some books that I just think, God, how did this person even get this book published? And probably they self-published, to be honest, if because some of them just are, like very surprising. I think some of the authors actually were published by publishing houses. And it's like, I read one author, reading a book on leadership, who basically said, lie, cheat, and steal your way to get ahead. And I'm like, I was like 5 minutes, maybe less than 5 minutes into my Blinkist summary of the book. And I'm like, I'm not even listening to the rest of the summary, because, this is not, this is garbage. And, I did listen with an open mind, and I said, this person's super unethical and I don't want to hear what they have to say. And so I moved on. So I think it's important to judge all sources with a healthy skepticism, but listen to everything with an open mind, and maybe they'll have something to tell you that you don't know already. And keep in mind that we all have confirmation bias, which means that we want to believe we're currently right about our current beliefs. And so we have to have an especially open mind to things that disagree with our current beliefs. But if we've done that and it doesn't hold up to water, which I would argue, Lauren wrote a little bit in some of the chat about some of the things she was skeptical of, and I think she was valid to be skeptical, and Dominic had a good reason why. And so that said, I wanted to comment on that because she made those comments earlier in the hand raising time. But also feel free to raise your hand, Lauren, if you want to ask questions or share other thoughts. That said, I want to let Rob go next. So, well, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, your didactic thing got me thinking. I'm an emergency room doctor, and I was just thinking, what I do is almost all algorithm. People, they come in, it's a straightforward problem, and there's presented with a given problem, you do this, this, and this, whether it be diagnostic or interventional or pain relief or whatever. And it's only really like 10% of people encounter that really require any thought. I mean, everything else is just reflex algorithm. But there's those where you don't have the answer. You try to figure out the problem, and you use what tools you have. And in the case of the ER, I mean, you do a history, you do a physical, you do a laboratory test, EKG, imaging, response to treatment. If someone's comatose and you give them Narcan and they respond, then they have a narcotic overdose. So, the whole thing is making a diagnosis. So I kind of look at the process as really inductive. Like it seems like you're always working with incomplete information, and you try to piece things together, and you use your tools and the data that comes in, and hopefully come up with a diagnosis. And sometimes not. Sometimes things just don't make sense. People have crazy complaints, and the tools you have at hand really don't give. I just wanted to make that comment about the work I do. I'm tired, but what I did.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And yeah, I don't know if it would be inductive or abductive, but it's one or the other. So,
abductive.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I was thinking abductive first, but when you said inductive, like I could see an argument for that too. But I think it's more likely to be abductive, because it's like one shot deal. You get this patient and they're, you get the data that you get from them and you got to make a decision quickly with limited information. So I think it might be abductive. So your internet might be breaking up. Did you say something?
No.
Okay.
No.
Cool. Well, thank you, Rob, and thanks for your help saving lives. Doctor is an important job, so especially emergency room doctors. So you may feel like it's just routine, but it takes a lot of training to make it routine, right? So a lot of medical school goes into that. So thank you for that. Katie, go ahead next.
Yeah, I'm kind of repeating what other people have said too. But I think what Daniel was asking, like, why do we make inference is also to save time. We don't have time to physically go out and do that ourselves. And also, I like Joe's comment about philosophy, because they're not going to spell out everything in a philosophy. You're going to have to make, I guess, make inferences of what you should do.
I didn't follow that, Katie. Can you say that again?
I'm saying that something like philosophy, it might be like they're not going to spell out, in a book anywhere, you shouldn't run a red light or something. You're going to have to kind of figure out that you're going to have to make your own. You're going to have to go from other things to other things. You're going to have to make your own. I'm not quite able to articulate what I'm trying to say, but I feel like Joe was trying to just possibly say what I'm trying to say.
Got it. Yeah, I think I'm gonna try to piece it together, Katie, and tell me if I'm misunderstanding. There are a lot of pieces of practical advice that no one's ever going to give you in life, and you have to piece it together for yourself, hopefully using sound judgment and good critical thinking skills. And that is, one of the purposes of the Freethinker Institute is to help each other get better at coming to conclusions about things that will help us in daily life and practical advice that will help us live better, happier lives. And the 5 intentions are intended to be a general guideline, but then we talk about specific subjects and try to get into more detail about how we can come to sound conclusions about a variety of subjects. I was really excited when we did our event on global warming, because I had always been like agnostic on global warming. Like I sort of believed it was true because a lot of people I trust said it was true, but I never heard anyone give a counter argument to the arguments that conservatives said made them global warming skeptics. And sorry, climate change skeptics. Now it's called climate change instead of global warming, although actually it turns out that global temperatures are going up. So, but different parts of the world are changing. So I guess that's why it's called climate change. But we came up with a different set of, like arguments that, sort of overcame those arguments. And I think that helped us come to better conclusions that can make us feel more certain that doing things that help the climate situation is actually a worthwhile effort rather than, a wild goose chase. But that said, I don't mean to digress on that subject, but I don't know if I understood your point well there, Katie. Did I?
I think you did. I think you bring up a great point with your example of the guidelines for this group. You that might even give room for disagreement too, because you might say, do no harm. What does that mean? Or you say, don't be rude. Well, you're not spelling out exactly what we can't do.
Right. We want disagreement, like actively seek it. And I try to get like, Trump supporters and Trump opposers in the same room and then talk about what we like and don't like about Trump in, a polite format, which is very hard to do, quite frankly. I've even failed to do that amongst close friends that had different opinions than me, but we do manage to do it here. And I don't know why it always works so well, but I do feel like we're able to talk about very controversial subjects in a very polite way. And I really believe that diversity of opinions is where we learn the most. And that's what I was saying in the beginning about listening to understand, is by hearing why people came to the conclusions that they did. For people who disagree with us, we learn far more than we do by asserting we're right and why we're right. You know, we don't learn anything from asserting we're right and why we're right. We learn way more by listening to someone who disagrees vehemently with us and passionately disagrees with us than we do by, you know, asserting we're right. So that said, thank you for your comments, Katie. It did take a little sort of you know, thinking, but I think I'm glad I figured out what you were saying. And Oded, how are you?
Thank you, fine. I have some concern.
Yeah.
In order to have critical thinking, we need data. And the problem in modern technology, you can get more data that your brain can process it. Our brain is limited resource. It's so much you can think. And today we spend so much time and energy to get the data, and we spend very little time to process the data. And this is the problem. Which means when you want to get good critical thinking, maybe you have to limit the data and use your processing more good, a better processing than have a huge amount of data. Today with technology, you can get data 724. And instead of that, you just concentrate or focus on minimum information, and then you can come to a conclusion. Otherwise, you defocus completely. And so my point is, let's stop getting too much data and use the data that we get and more wisely, I call it. And this is thing that we have to find the balance between quantity and quality of data. Thank you.
Yeah, I do think there's a balance between quantity and quality. But what I would argue, Odette, is that the 5 intentions will actually help you come to a better, you know, your concern, I believe, is that, well, there's so much data that it can be overwhelming. Well, that's true. What you want to do is you want to listen with an open mind. Well, first, you want to have your North Star or goal to be to seek truth and to be fair with the decisions you make. Second, you want to listen transparently to what other people share. And if you listen to the best arguments from people who disagree with each other strongly and represent the most likely to be right solutions, which is what we try to do with the FTI sessions about each topic we cover, and then use your critical thinking skill, and that's intention number 2, then use your critical thinking skills, which we're teaching about here for the next month and a half, to come to the conclusion of who has the right answer or the one that you think is most likely to be right. I would argue, you know, you can sort of hone in on the most likely to be right solution by surrounding yourself with diverse opinions that cover the most likely to be true answers. And so I would argue that being a part of this community and communities like this, if there are other ones like us out there, I think there have been a few that I've come into contact with that I've tried to create partnerships with. Conversations in New York is one, and then the humanist group of meetups is another. And so by doing that and surrounding yourself with people with different opinions, you know, you can come to much better conclusions without having to go through all the details yourself. Does that make sense, Oded?
I try to say it's not the people. I think it's the amount of information, because right now when I look at this meeting, what's called chat, there's 44 already. And people can talk and listen and write at the same time. How good is this kind of writing that they put in?
Oh, I couldn't. I felt horrible. I ignored Dominic because I was reading the chat, so I clearly can't multitask. If everyone else is doing it better, they're doing better than I am, because, and I apologize for that, Dominic. I really actually wanted to hear what you had to say. if you're open to repeating it, I actually would love to hear it again. If you can raise your hand again and tell me, I promise I'll pay more careful attention next time. I try not to focus on the chat because that's what happens is I ignore who's talking, and I don't like to do that.
It's the god of internet.
I know, right? Like the problem
Cut you
is,
off when you
like,
don't like.
your point really resonates with me, Oded, because there's so much going on now that staying focused becomes, half of the challenge. And, that's why, in the members group of the FTI, I have a lecture I give on how to achieve your life's goals in a state of positive flow, which is all about staying focused on, what you want to accomplish in your life, rather than allowing yourself to be distracted. Like, there's just so much distraction going on in the world today, and we're watching our lives pass before us, and it's not the way to live life. So that said, let me let Eve go next, and go ahead, Eve. Thank you, Oded, for your comments.
You're welcome.
Hi, yeah, thanks for putting this together, Garrett. I'm listening to everybody's discussions and scanning the chat, and you brought up 45, so I'm just gonna think, voice what's on my mind right now. Yeah. So I'm a Black woman and I work in tech, and it's very, very difficult as a Black woman, and specifically because I'm a designer and I'm, my job is to be a voice for the user and to push innovation at the companies I work for. And however, being a person of color, people have biases against, what I bring up, and me against, my culture. So I'm currently reading a book called The Sum of Us, and it's basically, her theory is she talks about how racism brings everyone down, not just Black people. And she went across the country and interviewed like hundreds of people, and talking about, the book talks about like the no sum gain or something like that. And basically her point is that the fact that The Economist came up, realized a while ago that in 20 years people of color are going to be the majority in this country, and not the minority anymore. And her book basically highlights the fact that half the country is deathly afraid of this, and that's why they vote for people like 45, and and the Supreme Court is in the state it's in, is because of this fear. And I just wanted to put that out there to the group and see what your thoughts are around critical thinking and this, how it's like tearing our country apart, and this fallacy that that white people are going to lose their hierarchy, their station,
Yeah. So thank you for bringing it up. Like, I think we should actually have like a whole event on racism, because it's sort of an unfathomable, like, I don't know, as a practicing Stoic, once I started becoming an active practicing Stoic, like the whole concept of racism seems so logically indefensible to me. Like, how can you judge someone as good, bad, or otherwise based on something they have absolutely no control over, which is the color of their skin, their eye color, if they were born without limbs? Like, all of these things are like things that you can't judge someone right or wrong for anything that they have absolutely no control over. And, that to me says that I think what you're describing is a very real thing, and there are a large number of people that are racist, but it's sort of something that I would like to invite people who are racist to come to an event on racism and describe for us why they think that racism makes sense, because I really want to understand it from their perspective. Like I said, like I practice what I preach, and I really want to hear, how can someone in their own mind defend racism? And a guy named Daryl Davis, are you familiar with him, Eve?
No, I'm not. No.
So Daryl Davis is a Black jazz musician, and he inspired me, to listen so much more than I did before, even though I always thought it was important and I always liked Socratic method. But he was a Black jazz musician that met with KKK members, and he would ask them questions to ask them why they were racist. He didn't tell them they were wrong. He didn't disagree with them. He just asked them questions to try to have them explain to him why they were racist, and he convinced over 200 people to leave the KKK. He got invited to the wedding of one of the guy's daughters because they liked him so much. And I'm sure he's a super personable guy. He must be. But he also empathized with these people who hated his guts from the beginning just because of the color of his skin. And I think, for me, that's like a modern hero, right? Like that's someone that, really listened to people and convince them from listening to them rather than telling them they're wrong. And so I try to be more like Daryl.
Yeah, I mean, I meet people all the time who, who are, who show their, bigotry in different ways. And I think, I mean, no one's in this country is going to admit to being racist. And like, most of the people I meet generally, do not think less of people of color. But when it really, the rubber hits the road is when it comes down to them, sacrificing something. Do you know what I mean? Whether or not it's their money or their position in society, even my friends, even like I had a best friend who advocates for, police accountability, but when I needed surgery, she wouldn't take a day off of work to drive me to the hospital, Right. I mean, so it really comes down to like, like what are you willing to, it's really about either abundance or seeing everybody as equal, like George Orwell or, whoever said, some of us are more equal than others, no one admits to hating another person because of their color of their skin, but.
I think some people do, to be honest, like the KKK, they admit that.
Well, I've never met anyone who,
Well, they may not have admitted to your face, but I'll tell you, some people have admitted it to me, and I guess I'm a white guy, so maybe they don't mind admitting it to me, but people will admit being racist, and I know people of all races that have admitted being racist. And so like it is way more common than any of us would like to believe. You just have to make someone feel comfortable being able to admit that. And I'm not going to say any of the people who said it to me, because that's part of why people trust me, is I'll never reveal who said what to me. But I will say, like, it's a surprising number of people who are racist, like way more than we would like to believe. And like, I don't think we're doing ourselves favors to just tell them they're wrong. And I thought I did, and we'll talk about this more in the event on racism, but I think Daryl Davis has the answer to racism, a big part of it, which is, helping people get exposure to someone who's different from them that they've probably never interacted with their whole life, and actually turns out to be a really nice person that is different than their stereotype of a Black man, right? Like, and I just think we need to have more interaction like that. And that's what I want to facilitate with the FTI, is people of all backgrounds, socioeconomic, racial, religious, like all backgrounds, interacting with each other with common values, which are the 5 intentions. And those common values can help us see from each other's perspective so much better, and we can learn so much from each other. And that's really the vision of the organization. So that said, I'm on a soapbox, and sorry for that, Eve. I really appreciate your points, and I'm sorry for the difficulty that you have to go through. And I hope that within the next, within our lifetimes, that what you're talking about becomes a thing of the past. Right now, it's getting worse, in my opinion, not better. And I hope that we can all be a part of making it get better. So,
but Mr. Lang, you're more pink than white, though. I was just making a joke. Like you're more pink than white.
Yeah, I am more pink than white. Thank you, Abbas.
Hey, can I jump in on this conversation now?
Yeah, you can. Go ahead.
Hey, so I was actually going to agree with Eve. I live in the South, the very, very southern part of the United States. I was born in Louisiana. I grew up in Texas. We lived in Mississippi for a while, and I now live in Arkansas. So I am South South.
Yes.
Just to give y'all a little bit of background. And I agree with Eve that I would say the majority of people that are the most racist don't think that they are. I think that it is so systemic, especially where we live, that I don't know how to explain it. They don't see it. They don't see that they're racist. And I think that's great that people have admitted to you that they're racist with their, I mean, maybe a starting point of acknowledging that they're racist. But the biggest problem in our country is with people who can't even see that they're racist, because obviously if you don't know you have a problem, then how can you fix it, right?
Totally.
But this kind of goes into what I was going to talk about before we started talking about racism. Is I feel that out of the different inferences that we talked about tonight, most people use inductive inference the most in their life to be able to come to their conclusions. So, and the reason why they get to their conclusions is because most of their premises are based on personal observation, right? So my personal observations in the southern part of the United States are going to be very different from personal observations of people that live in California, or they're even going to be different as a white female than that of a African American male. So, but I'm going to have these observations and I'm going to use inductive reasoning to come to some sort of a conclusion. And I think that's what most people use the most. I think we use inductive reasoning the most. And that's also the reason why so many people won't admit that they're wrong. Because until, like you said, Garrett, and I thought this was so good, using active listening and surrounding yourself with people with different and opposing viewpoints, you're not ever going to change your conclusions, right? Because they're all based on your own observations, and your own observations can't be wrong. The only problem is you're not considering observations from other viewpoints. And I think if people were willing to see that, that's where we could change, the world, and that would be great. And I wish that people that I live with around here could see that their observations about people of color are wrong. But I don't know if that will happen anytime soon. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Lauren, reach out to me, and maybe we can start a Free Thinker Institute in your city and start to get people doing that and invite people of a variety of backgrounds. And that goes for everybody, but especially I would love to get more people coming to these Zooms from the South, because I'm in the New York City area, so we get a lot of liberals here. I'm an independent, but we get a lot more liberals in the New York City area. And, most of the meetups we partner with are at big cities, and the big cities tend to be more liberal. So, I would really like to get more conservatives coming, and so that we get a more diverse mix of people. And so if you're interested in chatting about that, I would love to talk about it.
Sure.
Thank you for your comments. And I do agree with you that when people don't even realize they're racist and they just take their behavior as like normal and like nothing to consider racist, but they are actually being racist, that's what I would call a misunderstanding. That's my polite term for it. It's a misunderstanding. And it's misunderstandings and confirmation bias that steer people in such a wrong direction. And I would argue that there are no people who wake up in the morning and say they want to be evil. It's just that there are people who have misunderstandings that cause those of us observing them to say this person is doing something that's terrible. And it's really all rooted in misunderstanding rather than bad intentions. And so it's so important to, seek truth. And that's why the 5 intentions are what they are, because if you seek truth and you listen with an open mind to other people, when you should transparently share your beliefs, if you have good critical thinking skills, you'll right yourself and you'll realize where you're wrong because you're cognizant of your confirmation bias, and you're gonna, be, very willing to admit you're wrong in order to be more right. And when we have those common values as a group, like, we move each other forward. And that's really what I'd like to see for the organization and the world. And yeah, Katie, distorted observations, definitely. And that's what I mean by misunderstanding, is distorted observations. And that said, let me let Dominic go, and maybe he's willing to repeat again what I so rudely ignored earlier.
Oh no, you see, you have to multitask a lot. You're running a meeting, so I perfectly understand. So no worries. I think we just have moved a bit on from that point earlier, so no worries. I probably chime into the current thread that we have now. So to tie it back into data, statistics, and so on, as much as I actually appreciate the conversation on racism, but I just segueing a little bit back into, what we talked about earlier, how do you data analytics and so on. Actually, I was at another meetup a couple of weeks ago, which was run around, I think, a skeptics. There's the skeptics movement, right? And there were some, and they are also very concerned about, facts, fact checking, and what is true, what is not. I mean, they're skeptics, right? So, anyway, the one speaker that was there provided some statistics. I won't go into details because the actual point I was making, that in one of the slides and the statistics they had, there were slicing data, which was referring to a population, I think, in the US by white and black. So there you go. I think, to me, I'm just using it as a key metaphor here, where it's happening. You want to make data-driven decisions, and suddenly you go and you slice your data into white and black. And this is so indifferent. This is just not differentiated enough, because suddenly you have tried to draw conclusions but you have actually assuming a world that you have so harshly quantified into these two camps that, to me, whatever comes out of it has to be flawed and biased. Because, to me, there's the term white, for example, also what's often used, and maybe it's a bit controversial, but the term white male or black male, to me, is not a number, is a meaningless categorization, because it's too general. And if you want to work from data and you slice your data by these categories, that doesn't mean anything. Then it's just, you have labeled something and attributed a set of numbers to one category or the other. And this is where also I think then, again, the human factor comes in, human language comes in, simplifying things, because sometimes, we have to use shortcuts to communicate, but then we believe in the shortcuts. We believe that there is such a thing as, to me, sorry, I just say that black men want this, white men want this, white women want that. That, to me, that's a language game gone wrong.
Yeah.
That's and to me, this is a prime example of, you try to do data stuff to conclude something about the human realm, and it just goes wrong, because it's a language game that went wrong, and then so that's my take on it. Yeah,
I think that's a great point, Dominic, and that was part of what Lauren, I think, was writing about in the book that she was reading, where this person said woke people want that, and you were commenting, Dominic, like, there is no president of woke people who can speak on behalf of all woke people, right? There's no, just like, I heard conservatives say, what was it? Something about like the Black Lives Matter movement all thinks this, and it's like there's no leader, that is representative of all of Black Lives Matter. It's like an amorphous movement that people opt into and opt out of. And then they also said that the Black Lives Matter movement, were the ones that created violent, like looting and pillaging and stuff. And all of the research I did into that claim was that the leaders of the quote unquote leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement that are considered to be leaders were against it. And so, there's so much, like, we are in a world where there's literally a war on truth, where the truth itself is in question, even though all of us inherently, I would argue, including those people, I would argue we all have a proclivity to want to share the truth and to want to, seek the truth. But some people think they already know a secret hidden truth and are willing to lie in order to propagate that secret hidden truth. And what I would argue is we should all be transparent about our beliefs and let the truth be what we're seeking in transparently sharing our beliefs. And if we listen to other people with an open mind, we'll get closer to the actual truth, which bends its will for no person. And go ahead, Dominic, you wanted to say something.
I know, yeah, because you trigger a lot of thought. You see, good. I love what you're doing, the whole mission that you have. I love it. Just, I would I would allow myself the arrogance to add one thing, that there's also an open heart. Because everything that you say and that you're driving for is, and what we talk about today, and I don't mean to encapsulate or evaluate your entire mission that you have, but I'm a little bit,
it's okay.
But it's very head driven.
Yeah.
And that's where just something inside me is rebelling against that. What I miss in all that, even though all this is, I'm with all that, is just, there's this idea, even when I had our chat at the start, it was going, the world would be a better place if everyone would just be critical thinker, maybe using the concept that you were suggesting with the 5 intuitions or 4 intuitions, right? I don't think so. I think the world would be a better place, or would vastly improve, if we, as humans, maybe through educational systems or whatever, or maybe spiritual practices, evolve to a point where we can handle our emotions and channel them. And from that will come more reasonable thinking, because I think in the end, humans make their decision based on their emotions. And this is why the guy you quoted earlier, the guy who went into KKK and convinced everyone, even you said it yourself, why was he so successful? Because he empathized, and you said it, because they liked him.
Yeah.
This is why it worked.
Right.
To me, I don't know I know the story, I read an article about it, but to me, from what I understood, I read it years and years ago, this is why it worked,
I completely agree that it's very much emotion. Like, I feel like emotional intelligence is much more valuable these days, than but you keep going back to the story about this guy and the KKK, and I just want to clarify that they could have liked him, they could invite him over to dinner, but they weren't letting him move on their street, on their block, I mean, there's a complete difference, and that's why I brought up this book, like, and why I bring this up in a discussion about critical thinking, because if half the country is fearful that their place in the world is going to be displaced by people of color, and that's what's causing all the strife, and that's what's causing, Black people to not be hopeful of an equal future, that I completely agree that it's, it comes down to emotions and primal, fears. And I feel like things are not going to change in this country. You know, we're going to tear each other apart until people are critical about this emotional deep fear that a lot of white people have in this country, you know, which is not happening.
Yeah,
you know, at all.
That's what though, Eve, I think that Daryl was addressing that emotional deep fear. And I do think, to be honest, I think you should read a little bit about him, Eve, before you say that these people wouldn't have let him live on their block, because one of them invited them to his daughter's wedding. That's closer than being on your block, right? You don't invite everyone on your block to your daughter's wedding. Like, that's a very intimate sort of celebration of life. And so I think he really had a profound impact on these people, to the point where they literally left the KKK, which is like one of their social groups, because they liked him so much. So I do hear you in that. I think that it is an emotional decision when people are feeling this way, but I do think it is overcomable. I'm not so much a skeptic that I think that racism can't be overcome. I think it can, but it requires, understanding where people are coming from when they are racist, and hearing them out and asking them questions that help them come to the conclusion that they're wrong themselves, rather than telling them they're wrong. Because first, does that make sense, Eve?
Yeah, of course. I mean, people need to, you can't, nobody likes to hear that they're wrong. They're not.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's why, like, God, Eve, I used to pound people with logic and explain why they were wrong. And I found they just got more angry at me. And it's like, that's not the solution, right? The solution is to ask questions that help them come to the conclusion they're wrong themselves. And then when you do that, and it takes a lot more finesse and nuance, which is not my strength, but I'm trying to get better at it. You're far more influential. And you also, sometimes I'll learn, when I'm doing that, I'll learn that I was wrong. And then I can do it, and I can save face, because I can be like, oh yeah, now I see that this is the right answer. And turns out, like, the direction I was leading them in was the wrong direction anyway. And so, we should always be open that we may be wrong as well. And only by seeking truth can we be willing to acknowledge that. I do want to agree with Dominic that, like, you can't make generalizations about Black men want this, white women want that. I think your point about an open heart is really important, Dominic, but I think that is actually covered in the 5 intentions. The first intention is to be the best version of ourselves, which to me is a heart-based, like, what do you feel, of your own judgment is being your best self, right? That's kind of a heart-based emotion. And then the 5th intention is an eagerness to give and receive love, which I would also argue is a very heart-based emotion. So I think we have those in there, Dominic, but I wasn't recounting them. So I like totally understand if you didn't notice them, because I wasn't recounting them, but they are kind of embedded in the 5 intentions, because they are important. And I didn't mean to undervalue those. I tend to be very logic oriented. Like, I used to test out as a very high T. Now I test out as a slight T, and a more of an F, but like, the T is very strong in me in Myers-Briggs. So that said, I want to let Will go next.
Oh yeah, hi. Yeah, thanks, Garrett. Yeah, interesting. Racism is interesting. I was wondering, and it'd be great to do a session on it. And I'm wondering if we could define exactly what it is, because there seem to be different definitions of it as well.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Will, because there are different definitions of racism. But let me let you finish. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that struck a chord with me, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the most obvious one is the Ku Klux Klan type, with that obscene, disgusting attitude that some races are actually better than others. And then there's sort of from the woke side, you're not allowed to identify various traits within races, which why would you need to anyway? But I mean, if you were to say, for instance, that Asian people are extremely good academically, usually better than non-Asian people, that some people say that's racism, not allowed to say it. So I find that's interesting. That's all I wanted to say, that there's this sort of like extreme, you're not even allowed to say that, like Indian people are extremely astute and very good in business. They really are. And they just dominate business, especially small business. They're fantastic at it. But if you say that, it's like, wait a minute, you know, why are you saying that? So I think it's really good to look at what it is, and are there any negatives to the sort of the extreme woke version of you're not allowed to say anything anymore? Thanks.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you. I would I'm going to try to find my quote for this, but I agree with you, but I would say that it's here it is. The only safe generalization is that generalizations are generally unsafe. So, you know, like, yes, you can make generalizations, and I agree with you, Will. There are generalizations that are valid, but I think we need to take those generalizations with a perspective that every single individual we meet, we should still judge them as an individual. And I think you agree with that. And we shouldn't just assume that they fit the generalization that we're used to. And I think that's the important part. Like, you know, so yeah, I think we're in agreement there. So Rob, go ahead. And thanks, Will, for your comments.
Hi, I hate to go down this wormhole of racism, but there's just, I found Eve's comments very disturbing. I personally, I am a conservative Republican. I live in the South. I'm married to a Filipino. My son's married to a Black woman. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about the races. We get along fine. And for her to just make these assumptions that half the U.S. hates her or is afraid of her, it's a different world. You know, in 1950, 95% of the population was against interracial marriage. And now it's like 95% of the population is okay with it. And for her to think that attitudes are so backward, you know, I consider myself a Republican, conservative. I'm totally for gay marriage, abortion, legalization of marijuana, euthanasia. I think that the political left has been on the right side of history in terms of the civil rights and women's rights and animal rights and Native American rights and all of these things. But most people are pretty moderate. And I'm sorry Eve has had such unpleasant experiences. I work with majority Black people. We get along fine. We have Black neighbors. But again, this is a wormhole, and it's fraught with a lot of problems. But I think Eve needs to open her mind more. I think she's being narrow-minded. And I think
the book I was citing is based on data and her like a year's worth of study, like talking to people in the field. So, I mean, you can look it up. It's called The Sum of Us, you know.
I don't trust your data. I do not trust your data.
Well, let's not get it, like, let's save that for the conversation on racism. But what I would encourage is, we all come from a background of a certain paradigm of beliefs. And I do think it's always good to say, let me observe the data that's coming in that may disagree with my beliefs and listen to it with an open mind, which is part of the second intention. But let me also share my beliefs with other people, and let's hope that they will respect me and listen to me with an open mind. And you can't expect other people to listen to you with an open mind if your mind isn't open as well. So I would encourage both of you to keep the mind open and listen to the other person and do the research on what each of you has said. And let's have the conversation on racism. We will have an event on that. I think it'll be the 19th of September, because that's the next free night we have. but this is clearly a topic that people are interested in talking about. And I really want to have conservatives, liberals, independents, all talking about it, because it's an important subject. And so let's talk about it in a polite way that helps us listen to each other and understand each other's perspective, rather than say the other person is wrong. So that said, Ginny, you have your hand up next.
Yes, thank you, Garrett. This is just a general comment. Garrett, I just feel like this kind of meeting that you're holding is so valuable. I wish that there were 5,000 meetings like this every week, because you're making a contribution to mankind by having this type of meeting, Garrett. I just really want to appreciate what you're doing. It's just so valuable what you're doing. Just want to say that.
Thank you, Jenny. I really appreciate that. Ms. Fawn, go ahead.
Yes. What Daryl was speaking before, talking about attributes attributed to races. My first thought is that there's races is a social construct. It does not exist genetically. Scientifically, it's nothing. There is more genetic difference between neighbors in an all-white community than there is between blacks and whites, or Asians and Europeans, or whatever you want to pick. The only attribute I could say about Africoids is their skin is darker. You can't even say it's black. And like Egyptians are considered Caucasian, but their skin and those from the continent of India, skin is darker, but they're considered Caucasians. So we don't even know what these so-called races mean. They are constructs that we're cataloging our data, and when we speak, we have no idea how the other person catalogs that word. As one of the problems with communication, we don't know that the other person has the same categorization that we have. And the other thing is that listening to you and thinking about this, opening the heart has to be opened. Before my transition, I was entirely based in logic. I'm mostly based in logic. I was very empathetic, always was highly emotional, but I couldn't really show it when I believed myself to be male. Now, after my transition, before that, if you said open your heart, I didn't know what you were telling me to do. Now I do. My life has been completely transformed because of differences of perspective and everything. And it takes time to work through these things. So those are my two thoughts based on what I've listened to so far. And that's it.
Thanks, Ms. Fawn. And I agree with you in some sense, in that I've read the same things, that genetically race is a construct, and it's not I forget how it was described, but more or less like it agrees with what you're saying. But even if that's true, that doesn't change the reality that people like Eve are experiencing in day-to-day life. And we have to deal with the reality that people are experiencing in day-to-day life, and try to address that. And that's where people have told me, like, this is my perception, and my perception is reality to me. And even if someone's perception is totally a misunderstanding, it is their perspective of reality until you can ask them questions that help them realize themselves that it's a misunderstanding. And so all I would say is we need to put ourselves in a position where we can ask thoughtful questions that help people realize their misunderstanding rather than bullying them into telling them that they're wrong, which I don't think is the right approach, and is the historical approach.
Garrett, that's not even.
And you weren't saying that. I'm sorry, Ms. Vaughn. I wasn't saying you were saying to bully people. So, but go ahead and say what you wanted to say. I wasn't meaning to say you were saying that. Sorry if it came across that way.
It sort of did. I wasn't
Yeah, I know.
sure.
I realized
What I
that
wanted-
as you were responding, and I apologize for that miscommunication.
It's okay. It's really okay. My thought was, yeah, I agree with you absolutely that people's perception is reality. I mean, I remember a Xerox repairman telling me, it's all the perception of the customer. If the machine breaks down once a month, but that's exactly the moment that they need their report copied in 10 minutes flat. Well, the machine is always down. And as a repairman, that's just what you have to accept. So I know that you're absolutely right about perception having to be treated as if it's reality. But this is why I say when somebody starts talking about race, you have to ask what they're meaning. And that's kind of the same thing that you're suggesting with the classes on critical thinking. That was my only response, really.
Great. Thanks, Ms. Vaughn. DLJ, how are you?
All good, mate. Thanks. Yeah, enjoyed it. So talking of asking people questions, I have a question for somebody here. Because these debates always seem to be a very bad advert for wanting to come to the United States. So I need to. I want.
We are a complicated country, my friend.
As a foreigner, I wouldn't mind. Can I pick on Rob? He doesn't have to answer. Don't feel obliged. But I could do with an explanation. You said you're conservative and Republican. I'm Republican if I'm given the choice of monarchist and Republican, because that's to me the opposite. That's what the choice is. Right? So I'm not a monarchist. And I'm conservative and liberal, lowercase c, lowercase l, but I'd be neither uppercase liberal or uppercase conservative. Never voted conservative in my life. I would say I never vote blue, but in America, that means a completely opposite thing to as it means in this country. Anyway, so confused. Rob, can I ask you, you say you're conservative and Republican, and then you cited a whole bunch of things that I would consider to be typically left-leaning positions. So in what way would you say you're conservative and Republican? And if you don't feel like answering, do not feel obliged, but I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
No, that's fine. And I don't check all the boxes that you have in mind, apparently.
I'm not sure what boxes I have in mind yet, so you've got to lay them out for me.
Well, let's just take those issues. The gay marriage. I'm fine with abortion, or I'm fine with legalizing marijuana. They're kind of fault lines in American politics. So so you would say, well, that's a fairly liberal position. But in terms of what's going on politically in our country, particularly with an administration that is obsessed with race and constantly weaponizes race to divide people. I have a big problem with the whole social justice, identity politics, political correctness, intersectionality, the safe spaces, trigger warnings, microaggressions, all the stuff that goes on in our country. And I think that the left, the political left, is so obsessed with race, and they make it more of an issue than it has to be.
Thank you. Can I come back on that, Garrett, if that's all right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay,
Let's let Carly go because we're almost at the end of the night, but have a little back and forth, and then we'll let Carly go, and then we'll close out.
Sorry,
Garrett. So just, yeah, so I get, I don't like this group, therefore I'm going to identify this with this other group, that's what I heard, right? So I don't like what you call them left to me, the Democratic Party isn't left. But I see what they're doing, and I see the language they're using, and it smacks of somewhat authoritarianism to me, which I rebel against. But then to say, what I didn't hear was you say identify with Republican Conservative because for positive reasons. All I heard was I don't identify with the other group. So could you again? So on what basis would you say yes, positively Republican and Conservative?
It is my opinion, along with the opinion of most conservatives, that the Democratic Party has been hijacked by the far left and adopted an agenda which I find repulsive. I don't think women can be men and men can be women. I don't think boys can be girls. I don't think that Jussie Smollett was assaulted by white wing racists in Chicago during a winter.
Sorry, because I know we're running out of time. So so why not say I'm going to go with the Green Party?
Because the two-party system is such that no other party, we don't have the proportional representation.
Got it. Okay.
So yeah, all of us don't check all the boxes of what we tend to put people into boxes. We tend to just make assumptions about people what we hear their political leanings. But yeah, I'm very, very liberal about some issues. But just like abortion, I think that the Republicans are by and large wrong, and I think Democrats are by and large wrong, and that the Roe v. Wade level of restriction is an appropriate compromise. And I wish that became state law or national law. And I clearly differ with a lot of conservatives. So, yeah. Now, in a nutshell, I have a Lockean view of the world and how society should be run. I believe in sovereignty of the individual. That is the opposite of identity politics. I believe in equality before the law. I believe in natural rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, free speech. And I believe in...
Here, since I have to go soon.
Yeah, can we?
Thank you.
And apologies, I do want to let Carly go. She hasn't spoken yet, as far as I recall.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Garrett. Yeah, I guess this is segueing back into what I was thinking about earlier. I had made notes about how I think when Eve mentioned how fear is something that seems to be driving something, we had a conversation about emotions. That basically those emotions are usually tied to identity. And it seems like that is what we have sort of landed in this conversation on identity, what we identify with, what language games we play, what words we associate. And that literally, I just heard Rob say that we tend to make assumptions and put people into boxes. I think that's a fallacious thing to do, frankly, that if we were to identify as human beings, if we were to identify on more general or larger scales, that might be helpful, especially when using statements like I statements. My observations are this, in my experience, I see this. I'm unaccustomed to understanding how that is true for you, etc. But moreover, that the options that we have to actually discuss things politely in a way that has empathy of, that doesn't resonate with me, but I'm going to hear it out, allows us to gather more information and do more abductive inference and actually maybe change and evolve our way of thinking, our way of feeling, and our actual understanding for betterment of society, insofar as that we can identify on things that aren't that divisive or that simplistic, frankly, because human beings, we're diverse, if nothing else. So that's what I have to say. I have to run. Thank you, Garrett, so much for what you do, and everybody else for showing up again.
Thank you, Carly. Appreciate your comments. And the 5 intentions are what I hope that people can learn to identify with, rather than race, sex, etc. But to have common values that are, I think, agreeable to all reasonable people is the intent of the 5 intentions. If anyone finds a reason that they're not, let me know. But the goal is to create unity where there today is division, and to create unity that is substantial, not just superficial. I think the 5 intentions are very much meaningful and tangible and actionable And that said, I'm going to let Oded go, and then we're going to close out because it is late and I've been up since very early. So go ahead, Oded. Oded, you're on mute.
Okay, I agree with Rob. I think I have the same opinion about accepting all the what called abortion right and all the other stuff. But on the other hand, I don't accept anti-Semitism, none from the right, none from the left. And you get today more to the left than happened before. I just kind of person in the middle. I mean, my parents was born in the Middle East, or the east part of the Mediterranean Sea. Anyhow, the point is, now we have trying to get some extremists that try to get the margin of the people that will vote for them for political reasons. That means it's not what a party wants. The party wants to get power, and for power they want to sacrifice human rights and other values. And this is, I think, Rob has the same idea that to get political power, you leave some humanity behind. And this is the issue. So, as I said before, I go with Rob. I'm more conservative, but I accept other people's right to do whatever they want unless they hurt me. Thank you.
Thanks, Oded. Yeah, I do think that your quote, I'm going to quote it: "To get political power, you leave some humanity behind," is an important one. I don't think it has to be that way. I would love to encourage people here who feel like they have humanity and are willing to, go after political power, run for office, run for a local office first, start small, build a coalition. But we need more people running for political positions that want to empower people. I have a saying that power should be used to empower rather than to overpower. If we had more people in positions of power empowering people rather than controlling them, then we would be in a much better place as a country. And so that said, I want to let Sean go because he hasn't really spoken today. And Sean, polite.
It's already very late. It's very
I know
late.
you're passionate.
We're late. I'm not going to talk to him. I want to have two questions for Rob. Very interesting. Rob, first question. Okay, today in GOP, anybody tell truth. Everybody say, okay, 2020 election is fair. They cannot even get nominated in primary. Okay, I'd like to know what's your opinion about this. Number two, you say you are true conservative. To me, you are true conservative. Respect law, respect our constitution, right? That's very important. Do you think it's okay for many states there is a fake electors after Trump lost? They try to use fake electors to replace those real electors. Now, what's your opinion about those two things, sir? Please.
I'm sorry, but
I like to hear from a true conservative. Okay, I really want to hear from a true conservative. Okay.
Okay. I'm sorry. I really didn't understand the exact nature of your question.
I think Sean is referring to there's new news sources that said that the Trump folks created basically fake electors to go vote for Trump, even though the state didn't actually vote for him. Like, he tried to get this fake set of electors to vote for Trump, even though that wasn't really what they were supposed to do.
Yeah, the first question regarding the current GOP situation, any GOP candidate, if they say election is fair, 2020 election is fair, and they're not going to get nominated. Second question, say, Garrett already explained to you. Okay, those two questions. So I really like to hear from true conservatives. Okay, to me, is I just don't understand. To be honest. Okay, I like to hear from you.
Okay, well, I think there was a lot of skullduggery in the election. I think both sides cheat. I think, I think both parties like pull a lot of shenanigans. Yeah, I don't condone any of that. I think there's a lot of crazy accusations that go around. I think some accusations on both sides are correct. But yeah, that's all I have to say.
Okay, well, you were too late. Okay, here's my take, sir. I came to US 1988. I don't know what happened in 60s, 70s. So here's my take. Maybe 1960s, 70s, some people overplayed the civil right. And now the far right basically start counterattack. They use cultural war against the cultural war. Use cultural war and allies against cultural war. This is my take, sir. I think it's wrong, okay? I think it's wrong. Everybody has to play fair, okay? Today's GOP is a threat to our country, to be honest. Threat, okay? It's possible we may get into armed conflict because of MAGA, okay? Yes, left some far left, some policy far left. I don't like it, to be honest. But at this moment, the far right is a threat. Okay, whole lot of severe than far left. This is my opinion. Okay, thank you.
All right, so I'm going to close out. Thank you all for sharing your opinions transparently. I appreciate that, and politely, I appreciate that. And I think it was a good conversation. I hope you guys all learned something. I saw people write in the chat that they did. At least I saw that they did from the presentation, but I'm positive that even more people did from the conversation, and I appreciate that as well. Thank you all for coming tonight, for learning about critical thinking skills. We will have this video up on YouTube in the next couple of months, along with all of our critical thinking series and the other events that we've had for the past year and a half. I finally got someone to start doing video editing, so we'll have these events up. And thanks a lot, everybody, and hope everybody has a great rest of your night, and hope to see you all next week. Let me see what next week is going to cover. So next week is formal logic, and then after that is fallacies, and then after that is biases, and then we'll go into on knowledge and on wisdom. So we will also have some events for those in the New York City area in person on the 5th of next month, and would love to see people there. Go to the online community to find that out. I will try to quickly share before I close out the I'm gonna put the links in again. It's probably too late to do it, but I'll put the links in again real quick for anyone that missed them earlier. Thanks again, everyone, for your comments, your questions, and your participation, and your attention. So hope everybody has a great rest of your night, and I'll look forward to seeing you all at next week's event.
Thank
Bye,
you,
everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.